Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You've reached the No Name Cinema Society, the film review show that dares to dig just a little bit deeper. It is Thursday, September 23rd, and this is episode 66.1, kicking off our 66 series of episodes. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm one of your hosts. I'm here in my home in Los Angeles, and tonight we are reviewing the current feature from 91-year-old director Clint Eastwood. It's his 40th film as a director, the film Macho, in theaters and available on HBO Max. Speaking of Max, everybody, tonight's co-hosts are a crusty old cowboy looking to repay an old debt. Matty P is here with us.
Hello, Jonathan. Hello, Max.
And also, he hinted at it, a wayward young man with a chip on his shoulder and a rooster for his pet. Max Fauno is here.
Waving. Hello for our non-visual audience.
Referring to the people that listen to us on iTunes and Spotify. All right, guys, so this is our schedule for our 66 series of episodes. It starts, of course, tonight with our current feature, Cry Macho. On Monday, September 27th, will be our Indie Spotlight, The Lobster from 2016. Our classic movie discussion is coming up a week from tonight, September 30th, with our review of The Apartment from Billy Wilder. And on Monday, October 4th, there'll be our 50th Sound Off. Max will be back for that, in which we have an announcement. Max, Zach, and I will recast some of the films from 1970, and I will count down my top 5 Shirley MacLaine films of all time. Isn't that right, Max?
That's absolutely true.
Who's drinking with me, guys? That's what I need to know. I've got Goose Island here, my favorite. That's some water there, and Max, do you have, what is that, wine in a glass?
This is urine. No. This is Italian soda.
That's not good enough. So cheers to those of you who are drinking with me. Here's the drinking slide that you guys send us ideas for what we should do with the drinking game that you can play while watching the show. You drink anytime I say all time, contrived, contrivance, or verisimilitude. And anytime Max does a funny voice or mime is when you guys drink. And
Hello.
There you go. It's
Nanu.
drinking time. Cheers to all you guys out there. And let's get started with tonight. All right. I'm going to get started with the review. Get right to it, guys. You guys ready for the summary? They are ready. With their thumbs up. Cry Macho. Former rodeo star Mike Milo is asked by his old boss to repay him by going to Mexico to smuggle the boss's half-Mexican son, Rafael, back to the United States. But the boy's biological mother and her powerful friends may have something to say about it. Gentlemen, how was that summary?
Amazing.
Pretty good.
Max gives it a 10. Matt gives it like an 8 or a 9. All right. Rolling right along into opening thoughts. 1 sentence or less review of the film. Matty P, you're up first. You do better with opening thoughts generally.
I thought it was a serviceable, if not immediately forgettable movie.
Good opening thought. 1 sentence. I'm not saying I agree or disagree. I just like that it was brief. Max, your opening thought.
Clint Eastwood. Kind of love the guy. This movie, student film that was improvised on the spot.
My opening thought is trite pablum is my opening thought in reference to this film. But, you know, as we like to do on the show, I like to start with the positive. And I don't know about you guys, but some of the craft elements were the things that I liked best about the film, starting with the cinematography by Ben Davis. He shot a lot of the Marvel films, including Age of Ultron, which we reviewed on the show back in episode 8. Also, the film The Debt, the indie that we reviewed back in episode 27.2. I thought this film, Cry Macho, looked really pretty. Granted, a lot of it was exterior day, which is a lot easier to shoot, but he manipulated the sun and shadow in an effective way. I also thought the use of anamorphic lenses in the film were appropriate and effective given the scope of the film.
It was beautiful. It was super beautiful. Maybe unnecessary at moments.
What do you mean by that?
Maybe that's the wrong word to use. When the film opened, I was like, oh my God, this is stunning. And then with the addition of the music, I thought it was sort of like a music video. I didn't get any element of story in the opening outside of stunning.
Okay, Matty P, anything on cinematography?
Sometimes with career directors who make a movie all the time, regularly, that it sort of becomes puzzle pieces that fit together and less expressive and creative. I was surprised pleasantly that this had a nice amount of visual interest and some nice B-roll stuff and close-ups and things that may, not strictly necessary, but they filled out nicely. And it looked great, like you're saying.
Some of those choices of direction, which is coming up next, but the other craft element that I thought was a plus for the movie, Matt Polis will have something to say about this maybe, is the score by Mark Mancina. Interestingly enough, Clint Eastwood does a lot of his own scores, or has late in his career, but not on this particular film. Mark Mancina he brought on to do the score, which I found to be subtle but still melodic. It wasn't overly sentimental like some of the other scores from recent Eastwood films. It was nice background. It didn't manipulate or tug at the heartstrings in an unearned way, the way that many other of the choices in the film did, which I will get to. Matty Polis, score.
Your description of subtle is good, and I think that's what it needed to be. The story and stuff we're going to get into being so exact, the score could have easily amplified that unnecessarily. So the one or two action moments, the percussion, it filled the role. I don't think it was particularly noteworthy. In my mind, it sort of did what you're saying. It appropriately faded to the background in a good way.
But I find a lot of his scores recently, especially those that he did himself, are a little overly sentimental, and this was not that, and so I appreciated that. Max, anything on the score? Did you notice it?
I agree with you guys both. It was excellent. It served the purpose. It did feel heavy-handed in the very opening shot because there was no reason for the sort of melodrama of the music there, I thought. And then there were a couple of moments when the sort of tension of the police appearing or something, I felt like the backup band was just off camera, sort of emphasizing the emotion.
That doesn't sound good at all. Before we get to direction, is there other things, am I right in saying these are some of the better elements of the film? And Matt, sounds like you liked it better than anybody. Do you feel like these elements were better elements in film? And if not, what do you guys think what was the best thing about the film? Before I get into some of my other notes, Maddie.
I'm not saying it's good or bad necessarily, but one thing that's easy to forget about sound-wise is that the rooster. The entire character is built through sound effects because it didn't happen organically, and it kind of felt natural.
That's why Maddie P's here to offer the oral perspective, AURAL. So thank you, Maddie P. And to give us the oral perspective, ORAL.
Exactly. I totally agree with what Maddie just said. I thought the rooster, largely because of the sound effects, but also the actual rooster was fantastic. It was so well trained. It was literally like a little robot or a little being. I mean, I was really impressed by that. I actually thought Clint Eastwood was the best part of the film because this film has an immediate sentimentality. Oh my God, here's Clint again, from Outlaw Josie Wales to, Sergio Leone's spaghetti westerns to, all these great movies that he's directed, all these great moments that I remember experiencing in my life. And here he is way too old to be playing this guy. This particular character, and yet the sort of sentimental connection was there. So, yeah.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you about Clint Eastwood, but we'll get into performances a little later.
I'm not talking about his performance.
We're talking about the persona that he carries with him onto the screen. So the next thing that I did want to talk about, guys, is direction, as I hinted at earlier, because there were some good things to direction, and Matty P sort of insinuated it early on. One thing that you can say that's hard to argue with is Clint Eastwood can tell a story cinematically. And in this particular case, I appreciate the lack of apparent style. Sometimes shot reverse shot is all you need. I appreciate the slow, deliberate camera moves that are motivated and don't call attention to themselves. And the scene work is often appropriate for both character and camera. The shots are often framed for maximum impact. In his later work, however, and this is where I sort of veer into Max territory, particularly his work in this millennium, some of his choices veer towards sentimentalism in a way that I think winds up being a major detractor for the film. It comes up before it's earned, it's often not organic, and winds up feeling more schmaltzy than evocative. And Devin Michaels asked me to specifically use the word schmaltzy. So Max, sounds like you're on board with that particular set of notes.
I'll drink to schmaltzy, oh my goodness.
He's going to drink his urine to schmaltzy, excellent. Did you at least agree with some of the good things I said about the direction?
Absolutely. And I also really agreed with the tendency towards sentimentality in this millennium. Gran Torino, oh my God.
One of the co-stars of Gran Torino, of course, is somebody that all of us went to college with, the priest played by Christopher Carley, who was in my film Homecoming that Maddie did the sound design for, and Max was also a colleague of at some point or another. So we've got a connection to Gran Torino there. Maddie P, what about you? My notes on direction, some good, some bad.
Yeah, this is going to have similar as a lot of our discussions. Writing and directing, for me, it's hard to parse where the line is. But as I was watching the movie, I kind of made some analogies to things that it felt like I was watching. It wasn't bad, but it was more like playing the tutorial level of a video game, like a paint by numbers kind of thing where you're doing the thing, but it's hard to mess up. or maybe like an American Girl doll movie, if you've seen any of those.
Matt has 2 daughters. There's no way I would have never seen an American Girl.
You can give them a try, Jonathan.
I like what you said about paint by numbers, because I do think it's a paint by numbers kind of direction thing, but it is the right numbers. Like it's done with precision, and you know the choices are being made. And comes from a school of thought that I'm very appreciative of, that the director doesn't necessarily need to show off. The story's the king, and he's focused on the story. He hits all those beats, but nothing more. Doesn't try to elevate it to being something more.
I'd say the script is also story beats and like literally nothing more. It's like, oh, we want this to happen, and we want this to happen, and it will literally just happen. There's no nothing in between or a reason why it wouldn't happen.
Yeah, and that's a good segue. Story is next, screenplay is next, and I do want to start with the story because I can see the appeal to Eastwood. Max already brought up Gran Torino. I basically felt this movie was a strange combination between The Mule and Gran Torino, and that's basically merging a mediocre movie with a bad movie in Gran Torino. So while the seeds of something interesting were there, the script didn't seem to dig deep enough on just about anything. And the story is almost sort of obvious, right? Crusty old man and young kid connect after a long journey. I liked it better last year when it was called News of the World. Or if you want to go further back, the animated film Up. There's tons of other examples that maybe these guys have some ideas on. So this is a tried and true story. This whole thing had this sort of been there, done that sort of feel that I found deflating and quite frankly, boring. If you're going to have something as rehashed as this, what are you going to do to make it different or better? And I feel like this script didn't do any of that.
Yeah, it just seems so sanitized. The presentation of the characters, what they were doing, how hard it was, meaning not hard at all to do any of the things they're being asked to do, how easily it moved from plot to plot point. There was nothing that was compelling. It just sort of happened.
I 100% agree. I think Maddie said it better than I could.
The other thing I wanted to talk about is structure. So first of all, the opening scene in the film, or sequence, really, it's a couple scenes, that took place a year before the events of the film was wholly superfluous and unnecessary, with the extra added problem of throwing forced exposition in our faces. It was a terrible, terrible choice all around. Secondly, I felt like the film lost momentum in the middle. I understand the appeal of the nice lady in the small town, but this was a road movie and then all of a sudden it wasn't. It's about momentum, I think. That whole sequence is important in the movie, but it felt like a weird slamming of the brakes and required some adjustment as a viewer. There was a meandering quality to that whole sequence, I think. If there was a bit more danger or close calls in that town, or maybe not even that, maybe just more drama or conflict. But it felt just like 40 minutes of nice people, which was sweet, but kind of dull.
100%. I totally agree. It was painful and unnecessary. On the bright side, you got to sort of spend a little while with this aging Clint Eastwood, who I have enjoyed having him in my life as a film goer and a movie watcher in the past. So there was some element of enjoyability to that. Maybe I'm really sentimental.
You make Clint Eastwood sound like a snuggle pillow.
He's a little bit of a snuggle pillow in this movie. I don't even think he found what character there could be in that role. He was tough, but he wasn't. He was way too old to be on a horse. It sort of was obvious when they cut to the body double. Yeah. It was unnecessary for any of the action to be there. It should have all been kind of done in light tone, but yet he kind of took it seriously. And then there were moments where he was making fun of himself in the role.
But I mean, like, if you want to spend some time with Clint Eastwood, wouldn't you rather spend time with a better movie? Like, what you mentioned, the spaghetti westerns, or even White Hunter, Black Heart, or Unforgiven, yes, or Perfect World. Like there's other options to, if you want a snuggle pillow of Clint Eastwood.
Absolutely, but I do think like there is an interesting thing to be able to see someone's life, and also to be able to see one's own reflection in the passing of time through others.
So the other thing, screenplay wise, I want to complain about essentially is characterizations. Character transitions were rushed to me and almost seemed to happen off camera. The boy choices in particular swung back and forth like an uncomfortable pendulum without any character rationale. For example, why did he pretend like he wasn't going back with him and then hide in the back seat of the car? What was the point of that? Furthermore, I felt a lot of characters were strangely flat, even the leads. They gave each of them sort of a one-sentence kind of backstory, but in a vague, undefined kind of way. The lonely widower with a debt and the abused kid with parents in a custody battle of sorts. That's kind of all that there was to them. And that's not even to mention the tertiary characters, like the mom, who was such a strange creation with this weird behavioral pattern that was somewhere between drunk and mentally ill, neither of which was believable. Or her henchman, who seemed kind of obsessed, but why really? Like, does he love the crazy mom, and why would he? And then Dwight Yoakam, who's just this sort of double-dealing Texas cowboy businessman guy with no real depth. I admit that in spite of her small amount of screen time, the character of Marta felt more full to me than anyone else on screen, but the rest of them felt a little flat and one note.
Yeah, I totally agree. The same as the plot. It's like whatever needed to happen in that moment, the screenwriter decided should happen, and it just happened without any rationale or sort of continuity. I had a problem with the kid in particular because he's on the screen the whole time, and he was set up for the first 20 minutes of the movie or whatever it was as this dark, nasty kid and into all sorts of trouble. And they found him in the spot that would seem to confirm those rumors. But then he's just like this sweet boy who has a pet rooster, and
but aren't we all? We're all sort of like dark, nasty kids, but aren't we all sweet boys on the inside, Maddie?
Yes, that's true, Jonathan. I don't know. I didn't buy his character at all, even after I realized he wasn't going to be what he was supposed to be. Everyone just kept doing things without. Yeah, what?
I don't mean to argue with you, but I mean, like, you could. What it was set up by people that the whole point was, the parents didn't understand him, so he was set up as being one thing based on their perspective. So I bought that he wasn't actually that, because what we're told is not always what's true, especially from characters that sort of have an action run.
That's true, but they didn't find him at the quilting club. They found him at a rooster fight. Like, they found him where he was supposed to be, and I don't think he put that rooster in a fight after knowing him for a minute. But
there's a cultural thing involved with that, but that's maybe a discussion for another day. Max, characterizations.
I think this is totally what I meant. You articulated it better than I did, but I put the student film improvised on there because I felt like the characters would switch depending on what they needed. It was like, well, actually, let's scrap what we were going with. Let's have you do something else, and we'll try and make it the most interesting we can. These moments really felt like people would get together and say, the script isn't working, so let's kind of talk our way through.
They all had inexplicable behavior just based on the scene.
And that doesn't leave a lot of room for good performances. That's where I'm going with that. So I think on the whole, with the possible exception is the aforementioned Natalia Travin as Marta, are not very good to me. Max, do you have more?
One addition. Sorry, guys. I agree. Marta really tried, and I think did a very good job. She may have possibly been in a different movie than the rest of the folks, but I think she did an excellent job. There was one star turn. The gentleman playing the deputy, Jorge Luis Palo, was a star turn performance right there. There was a short period of time, 6 months to a year, where we were roommates. So it was fun to see him in the part, and I got a real kick out of it, and I thought he did a great job.
So wait, you were roommates with the deputy that had the wife with the dog?
With the dog, exactly, the angry, and he was terrified of her anger.
More connections to Clint Eastwood. We have Christopher Carley in Gran Torino, Joseph Cross, who's in my film Homecoming, is in Flags of Our Fathers, and Josh Hamilton's in J. Edgar, another bad Clint Eastwood film from this millennium. So Clint and I have the same taste in actors, I think, Max.
I'm sorry. I mean, yes.
Well, you're next. That means you're next.
Hey.
Would you turn him down because you were like, I didn't like Cry Macho, man?
No, I would. Clint.
I appreciate your honesty.
Cry Pequeño is next.
Yeah, well, I mean, that'd be a good part for you.
Thank you.
Couldn't help it. So, all right. So, yes, as I was saying, that leads me to performances, which I think on the whole, with the possible exception of Natalia Travin as Marta, are not very good. They're not laughably bad, as some performances can be in other films. They're just often awkward and not evocative. Max talks about liking Clint Eastwood, and to me, he's just a variation on his persona and relies a lot on his old tricks to convey certain ideas. And maybe that's what Max liked about it. I think we've come to accept that from Clint Eastwood at this point. Like, I actually don't think he's delivered a truly great performance in his career, as great as many of his films are. A different actor might have added a lot. A Robert Duvall, for example. The kid I found to be awkward and not very natural, to the point that Matt often tries to make on the show. Acting's a hard thing to do, especially for someone young and supposedly untrained. But the fact remains, he didn't quite know what to do with his body and stumbled around his line readings, only playing one thing at a time. Dwight Yoakam, on the other hand, had more experience and no real excuse, but he still felt awkward to me. In his defense, he was saddled with a lot of bad dialogue that was often expository. He didn't do anything with it, though, making the most bland choices. I never felt either his interest in the kid or his interest in the money, whatever his true motivation was. And I feel like I should have. We've got a great actor here with us on the show. I've just broken down some of the performances, Max.
Spot on. And that's where I got improvisation sense, because it really felt like everybody just showed up and said, okay, we're going to do this today. Let's give it a shot, but only one shot.
Is it true what I was saying about it's more his persona that you found appealing? That's what you liked about it, in the sense that, like, I didn't think it was a very evocative performance. It's just the same thing over and over again, but you found that comforting, it sounds like.
Oh, yeah, the performance, I didn't think there was really I thought it was exactly what you're saying. Just sort of a clunking around in an outfit or a uniform. It was hard to see what was going on underneath for him.
Matty P, performances.
I don't have that much to add, except it might be a pretty genius move to create a movie basically around the exact situation he would be in. Like, he made a movie around himself. So what movie can I make that lets me be as old as I am, doing what I'm doing, and just film it? And then what story would actually pop out of that?
Well, except it was based on a book, found it anyway. Like,
to choose this movie, it seems very appropriate. I mean, it worked on that level. I mean, it could have been better. I don't think any of us really appreciated the lack of nuance, but it was the movie that could be very easily made at this point.
I don't know how easy it was for him. He was looking pretty fragile walking around some of those scenes.
You know, I would say I agree with you, JB. I think if he wanted to do what Matty just suggested, which I think would have been a genius turn, he would have found something really about somebody who's nonagenarian.
Yeah,
and
he was a little too old for this role.
Yes, lean into that.
90s. And why would you send someone in their 90s down to do like a dangerous job like this? That's incredibly stupid.
That's true. Yes, I agree. I didn't think of that angle a bit. No one would send a 91-year-old out. The
story is just, I don't know. I had a really hard time with the story.
Yeah, I think we're well agreed on a lot of those points. Yeah. And Matt used paint by numbers and sanitized, and I think those are the qualities that are take home for me. All right, I'm going to move on, guys. You guys good?
Yeah.
Good.
Max, it's your favorite segment. What's it called?
Oh, tea time.
It is the T word. Oh, we should have glasses of tea whenever we do the T word. What a brilliant idea.
Tea time.
I love it. So this is this segment where we talk about the themes of the film. Davey, who used to be on the show, used to hate talking about the themes of movies. When we did, we had to dance around it. We called it the T word. The segment was born. And so now we're going to break down, dig a little bit deeper as we do in the show, and try to understand what this movie was about. And I'm not so sure it was successful at any of the themes that it approached, but here's what I took away from it. First, for the latter half of his career, Clint Eastwood has been poking holes in the persona that he spent the first half of his career building up, specifically as it relates to masculinity, i.e., what it really means to be a man. The title calls it out, and they have a scene which addresses this directly. The idea of toughness and stoicity being the ideal for the male identity is archaic and somewhat hollow. The film basically says, in a not-so-subtle way, that perhaps that's fool's gold, the idea of macho, and compassion, understanding, and humility should be what really makes a man, and that the choices we make based on pride or perception of pride often leads to disaster and further conflict. Given how the dialogue refers to this every now and again, this feels like perhaps the main theme of the film. It's in the title, for gosh sakes, but I don't think it was very successful because there's not much beyond the very obvious dialogue. These ideas aren't really tested or explored visually, just discussed. Films like Unforgiven and A Perfect World by Clint Eastwood do a far better job getting underneath the same idea. Matty P, as a man's man, I'm going to start with you. Masculinity.
I agree. I like what you said, because it makes me think that you have to bring a little more to the movie than what it gives you. But if you do, then it's successful. In other words, they have the minor dialogue that touches on what you say, but then Clint Eastwood is sitting there saying those lines. And if you bring his history back in, and then you see how he's acting in this movie, which is very sweet, then he's actually leading through example. And I think it's pretty good, actually. Now that I'm looking back on it, I like that angle a lot.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, like it feels like a comment on the characters from his previous career, but again, he did it much better in Unforgiven. Max, masculinity in Cry Macho.
I can see what you're going at, JB. I think you might be being a little bit generous to be giving that theme to such a sort of disorganized film, if you will.
Well, I did say it was unsuccessful at it, but I mean, like, it did feel like it was. Yes. It was on its mind.
Yes. Okay. Very, very good. I mean, no, I'm definitely in agreement with what you're saying, and what Matty pointed out too. Yeah, masculinity could be something that he was hoping to work in.
There's all that dialogue about toughness and by naming the rooster Macho, like, you know, and what makes a man, like, and teaching him, they talk about grit at one point. So it feels very, like, on the nose, but you know, I'm starting with, I think, what is the most obvious of the themes.
Okay, cool.
All right, so Maddie, I'm going to dig a little deeper, see what I find. This one will relate to Maddie a little bit, because I'm going to call this one parenting/role models. I think it's interesting that none of the minors depicted in the film, minors, for whatever reason, are being guided by their biological parents. A recurring theme that comes up on the T word a lot is the idea of real family being the one you choose versus the one you're assigned or born into. At one point, someone says that some people weren't meant to be parents. I don't know if that's true, but I know that sometimes people aren't ready to be parents. And the parental figures in the film, meaning Marta and the Clint Eastwood character, Mike, had three qualities that I found interesting because they seemed successful. One, wisdom, due to their age. Two, selflessness, probably because of that wisdom. Third, a lack of pandering, which the kids seem to appreciate. Now, that's not to knock biological parents, but it struck me that perhaps the rearing of a child requires more. For example, my dad was a good man, but he was very uncomfortable with talking about sex with me, for example. Luckily, I had a couple big brother figures in my life. I'm the oldest in my family, but I had big brother figures, about 15 years older or so. One a coach, baseball coach, and the other a theater mentor, who filled in the blanks of those things, and I think came to shape the man I came to be just as much, if not more, than my actual parents. And so this film made me wonder that perhaps it doesn't just fall on the parents themselves to shepherd the next generation. Certainly they're the first line of defense, if you will, but perhaps it falls on all of us as a society, whether we have children or not, to help guide the youth of the world with wisdom, selflessness, patience, and without pandering. That can come in many forms, whether it's tutoring like Devin does, or educational theater like Kelly does, or just listening to the thoughts and concerns of the youth, trying to understand and empathize. They need us more than we realize, and as men of a certain age, maybe we should try and to be more present if we want them to make the world a better place, like we often say, we hope that they will. So that's what I got from this movie, a rumination on the concept of parenting, role models, and shaping the next generation.
Oh, absolutely. That's the principal theme, if you will, that I got from the film, is that family is not necessarily biological. And in this film, literally not biological, because it's either been torn from you or you were running from it, essentially, as the young boy was.
You know, I got more of the sense of the old phrase, it takes a village,
yes,
is what I sort of got from the film. Maddie P., this whole idea of parenting and role models.
Yeah, I think your observations are really good, JB, because the way you view and then interact with a child is very different if it's yours or someone else's, which may seem super obvious, but I think when you are a parent, it becomes more apparent than you'd ever thought it would be, where just interact with your own kids differently. And the other kid that's not yours could be doing the exact same thing, and it doesn't matter, and yours is doing something very similar, but it matters a lot. And there's just nothing you can do about that. It's sort of human nature, I guess.
No, well, I mean, like, it's, I mean, you don't want to step on toes. People are sensitive, but at the same time, you know, like, and it's just about, I think it's really about listening to the younger generation. Like,
yeah, and it's about feeling responsible to sort of create the optimal environment and to get the perfect teachings and all the stuff that goes through your mind every minute. But in this case, these people weren't the biological parents, and I think that's why they were able to successfully be these role models that the kids needed that maybe real biological parents couldn't have been in those moments.
Something about biological parents, because we are assigned to them to some degree. We didn't choose them, so it feels forced upon us. And so the idea of rebelling against biological parents is very common because we want to be able to choose the people that we look up to some degree. I don't think that's a conscious choice that the younger generation is making. I actually just think it is human nature.
What does it mean to be a family? I would have said is the theme that I got most clearly.
It's sort of trite the way you say it. It fits because the movie is sort of trite.
Oh gosh, yeah. It's trite time.
Trite time. Speaking of trite time, it's closing time. Do you guys have closing thoughts? Anything else you wanted to add, or like a sentence to sum things up?
I guess I don't have anything ready to shoot off, so you can go.
We're gonna close out. How about that? Our next current feature, our goal here, we're having a hard time getting episodes out. Everybody's busy, but our goal here is to come back on Thursday, October 28th with a review of Denis Villeneuve's Dune, the comeback of Dune. Ooh. And that'll be hopefully in late October. and that'll kick off our 67 series of episodes. Our next show, however, is this upcoming Monday night, our Indie Spotlight, a film from 2016 that made one of the other guys' top 10 list. The Lobster from director Yorgos Lanthimos is coming up this Monday night, and that'll be with Devin and Patrick. All right, guys, it's time to say goodnight.
Good night.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.